in Cambridge, she had a course where we just read poetry. And for her, it was a course in breath, in how you use your breath when you read a poem. And that reading was just exquisite. I don't think anyone could have read that poem better. And really all the emphases right, all the points right, all the line breaks gotten right. Clearly she's read this poem before. But this is what I mean. You just read this poem at the level of just sound. And what is it doing? But more importantly, the point I want to make before I open it out to all of you to discuss what you think about this, I don't think this is a poem about reconciliation or about wholeness gotten from the reconciliation of dualism. I think this is about the feminine speaking back to the masculine, not in a Gobar way, simply a reclaiming of voice, because it's Eurydice speaking, but because it's actually saying to the male principle, the principle of war, the principle of the earth and ruling the earth, is saying, listen, there's an aesthetics and a politics of loss that the female knows, that the woman knows. And this politics of loss is what you must learn. And this is what she does throughout her career, is my point. That what HD is doing is not reconciling male and female, but actually trying to tell us through her engagement with psychoanalysis, with the psyche, which involves in the self. What is psychoanalysis if a recognition of the limits of self? You know, Nilofer Kaul from Hansraj College, another one of my heroines, I've mentioned her, gave this beautiful metaphor when she came to give a talk at, I put it in this book, she came to give a talk at both the gender study group in DU, which I used to organize, and Jindal, where I used to teach at that time. And she said, you know, the unconscious, to explain to you what the unconscious is, I must use the metaphor of you're in a car, you're driving in a car, and it's moving, and you look up from the back seat and there is nobody driving. That is the unconscious. You don't know, you don't have control over yourself. Now, if you can recognize that as yourself, firstly, then you will not want to kill, you will not want war, you will not want the phallic power that fascists embody. One. Second is that, so that comes from psychoanalysis. Second is that HD was a poet of nature, right? I mean, she was a kind of a late 19th, early 20th century, mid 20th century transcendentalist, and as many people have seen. So all that stuff about flowers, you know, remember her flowers are not like Amy Lahl's flowers. Amy Lahl's flowers are all opening vaginas, really, because she's writing a certain lesbian aesthetic counter to pound. HD's flowers are doing something completely different. Look at the flowers in this poem. Second. Third, so the world of nature is doing something very different in HD. Third is her interest in the hermetic, in hermeticism and the occult. This I don't even understand very well. People either dismiss it in her and call her cracked, or people call her whatever, but she was interested in it, very deeply scholarly. So that's the third, which I'm not in a place to comment on, but there's something of that going on too in this poem. And finally, for me, it's really a question of what I call, you know, I was talking to an auto driver yesterday, and he was introduced me, he had on his auto Jai Shri Sham Baba, and I didn't know Jai Shri Sham, and I didn't know who Sham was, and he told me the whole story, and apparently this Sham is called a Hare Ka Sahara. And I thought that's an interesting, very interesting story and idea. It's a long story involving Krishna and involving his head being cut off and him always standing by the loser. And that's what HD is. She's always standing by the loser and also making a point about losing and the aesthetic of losing and the politics of losing in this last section, the 7th section, which is stunning to me. And finally, my last point about this poem is she's making a point about, and in her poetry in general, about writing, where writing, the act of writing, is in fact all we have. So when her husband Aldington came back from the war, and he'd suffered in the war, and he said stuff which he was doing her before that, he said, it's all rubbish, I'm not doing it. That was not an affair, not his, insulting her in a hotel by saying he can't leave this other woman and threatening that he'll sue her if she went ahead and had the child, which she did. Anyway, it's not that it was the writing, it was the betrayal of poetry till the very end. Her last lines before her death are about writing, are about poetry. Like, I have to do this as a job. And she saw it as a political point against fascism, that creative responses to fascism is all we can do as literary students in many ways. Let us not pretend that we can do other things, and that this writing can actually offer, if you read her carefully, if we bother to read HD, if we bother to pay attention to her, this will counter fascism. The Sehmat exhibition of the Congress and the left. So that's Eurydice. Any thoughts on this poem? And we do have half an hour for the discussion of either this poem or the other one I wanted to read was Demeter, the last poem, which you can read in your mind as well. I don't want to tax Meera on it again. But yeah, Demeter is the second poem I have lots of time for. I like Cassandra and Leda too. And she has many others, by the way, in the early poems on mythical. But what I'm trying to argue, and that's my contribution to HD scholarship, meager as it is that we do not read her like the second wave feminists do, as simply giving voice to women and as simply women's agency. She's doing much more. It's a
talk doesn't have a question and answer session, but we're breaking with tradition here, partly because
Sunil would have liked it.
Sunil would have liked it, and partly because it's provocative, and I think there's enough for us to chew on and to spit out as well. So if there are questions, discussions about the poem.
Yeah, they don't have to be questions, they can just be comments on the poem, your thoughts on the poem, your thoughts on HD, anything.
Feel free to shoot them now.
While chai is on its way, right? Yes. I always seek to learn from people reading HD because I just can't stop reading her. And I hate my literary education in the BA and MA for not having studied her.
What is the date of the Leda poem?
I don't remember, but I can look it up.
I was just wondering whether it's before or after this Leda and the Swan.
Yeah, it is definitely after. And it's a rewriting of Leda and the Swan, I think. And since you all study it in third year honours, please read HD along with it and slap the HD poem in your teacher's face.
Since I happen to be that particular teacher.
Slap it in PK's face, a Hindu student. Well, now he knows. Now he knows better. He'll bring the HD poem to class himself. Yes. How relevant to the institution of capitalism, feminism, crucial. I think that we have not learnt from HD at all. So third wave feminism, that's a very good question actually. So after second wave feminism, which I said in the 1970s revived HD and wrote about her for the first time. So imagine, here's a woman writing from the early 20th century to the 60s, 70s, and then no one paid any attention to her, no one wrote about her, they only wrote about Eliot, Pound, William Carlos Williams, all the men. Then the feminists jump in, the Gober and company, and they go hammer and tongs it and say, feminist, feminist, feminist. And I feel like not good enough. And then the third wave, the Judith Butler and company. And they have not at all talked about HD, not least because they can't appropriate HD. HD is not saying she's post-sexual or post-gender or non-binary or any such rubbish. She's very much within the Freudian complex. But I think, therefore, has much more to say to feminism today than any other kind of feminism, certainly more than Judith Butler's feminism, which is why I think that, I want to work on an essay on HD in relation to Juliet Mitchell. Juliet Mitchell is one of the most brilliant psychoanalytic feminists from the 1960s who wrote an extraordinary book that I urge all of you to read and read it every day on the bathroom seat for the rest of your lives, called Psychoanalysis and Feminism. And the first two chapters are called The Making of a Lady. Please, just every woman in this room, just read it, okay? So what is Mitchell doing? And Mitchell belongs band of women in Britain, and you know the British are very understated about their feminism and about everything they do. So we are only hogged, we only get the gender, non-binary, what are your pronouns kind of feminism in India, because these British women will not do any of that shit, right? Doing serious engagement with psychoanalysis. They ran a journal in the 1970s called M/F, masculine/feminine. These women take names up because they're so British, you'll never find them. They're hiding in the woodwork. You know, when I went up to Professor Gillian Beer, she was Gillian Beer. I mean, she'd written Darwin's Plots, for example, which rewrote the 19th century, and I wasn't even a 19th century person, but I knew. I had begun to read these people when I was applying to Cambridge. So she swarmed down to me in the English faculty opening party, and she said, hello, in this very British, she has a very British accent. She said, hello, I'm Gillian. And it didn't occur to me, I was traumatized. I was the only black monkey in the room. There were 15 white PhDs, 5 white PhDs on this shivering October morning in Cambridge, October evening in Cambridge. I was from Bombay. We don't have a winter. I was terrified. And then this woman swans down to me, and then she said, where are you from? And I said, India. And she said, oh, you've traveled a continent. I've just shifted college from Girton to Clare Hall, and I'm traumatized by this move. And then it clicked in my head, Girton, Gillian Beer, Clare Hall, she's the new president of Clare Hall. And I said, oh, you're Gillian Beer? And she said, And then I blabbered for the next 15 minutes. I mean, I'm an Indian who's read Gillian Beer, for fuck's sake. So I went on about which essay I'd read, which book, how I liked her book on George Eliot, but I didn't like her discussion of the end of Mill on the Floss, how I loved Darwin's Plots, how I hate this essay on Woolf, how she didn't take me on as a PhD student last year when I applied for Madness and Sexuality in Woolf, and why didn't she, and all of that, and then that she's my heroine, and I stopped after a 15-minute non-stop oration. And all she said as a British woman, and this, I mean the British hide in the world. After this 15-minute neurotic, outrageous outburst, she said, the British don't advertise themselves, but all these women you must read. Jacqueline Rose, Jacqueline Rose, Juliet Mitchell, Parveen Adams, Elizabeth Cowie, Elizabethcowie. These were all women who sat in bars and pubs and coffee houses and discussed psychoanalysis and feminism as part of the women's movement in the 1960s. And they were very, very serious women. Jacqueline was the coolest among them. She went to France and studied at the Sorbonne, and she attended a lecture by Julia Kristeva, who wears lipstick. And you know the French always, the women are all ultra feminine, and the British women are ultra non-feminine. So when she went to France, she said, oh my God, for the first time I realized you could be a feminist and wear lipstick. This is so cool. I'm going to wear lipstick. So she came back and she'd bought a scarf from Yves Saint Laurent, one of the top fashion designers in the world. But when she came back to England, she was meeting her frumpy, non-feminine, English, working class, Marxist feminists for this discussion of Freud. So when they asked her, what is this YSL thing that you're wearing? What is YSL? She said, oh, it's the Young Socialist League. So, you know, that's the British feminists for you. They have to hide any association with makeup and lipstick and femininity. But Jacqueline has perfect nails and three perfectly poised bangles and coiffured hair and lots of lipstick. So, but these women don't ever talk about themselves, but they did this amazing work. So I'm going to read, I have an essay which I'm planning now on H.D. and Juliet Mitchell and this rewriting of Freud, because all that Juliet Mitchell does to take Freud and stand him on his head in psychoanalysis and feminism, but which is not to say that Freud, you know, again we think of Freud, you have Freud in this background text, all of you will be reading Freud and you read my introduction to it. I'm saying that Freud is fantastic, okay? We think that Freud is all about sex and we think that Freud is stupid. That's only because we don't actually ever read Freud. Freud is actually, if you read him on a balance, I've read, unfortunately I have to tell you, unlike Juliet Mitchell who she walked into the British Library one summer and walked out having read all 23 volumes. It took me many summers to read them, not one, but having read all of them, if you on the balance look at it, Freud writes much more about political violence than about sex. But what he's also saying is that political violence has the sexual angle to it. You know, we humiliate men and women sexually in war, in police stations, in Kashmir. We do it sexually first, we pinch their cheeks, we sodomize them. There's a sexual that's tied up with the political. It's our first port of entry into destroying a person. And Freud saw that. So my point is, there's a way in which Freud is not being dismissed by these women at all, not HD at all. You know, again, we think of HD as, there are moments that you can appropriate as HD hating Freud. I mean, who would not hate Freud? He was a big bearded man. He could be idiotic. So there's that famous moment where HD knocked the statues down on his table and walked out, right? Everyone, all the Gobar feminists jump on it and say, look, Freud was a bastard, Freud was a man, blah, blah, blah. But no, Freud is Tiresias in Helen in Egypt, and Freud stays with her through her life, teaches her things that no one ever taught her. And Freud tells her to go back to writing after her breakdown. So I don't buy this theory of Freud as an asshole. It's easy, it's too pat. This is the problem I have with third wave feminism. It's a long answer to your short question. My problem with third wave feminism is that it's a feminism of vengeance. It's a feminism of all men are bastards, all men are this, it's all horrible, they're all harassers, they're all rapists. Women are all great and fantastic. Women are not. Women are fascists. Women are nasty pieces of work. Women are schooled in patriarchy. They're trained to be as nasty as men and can be worse, number one. Look at female principals in Delhi University colleges. I mean, come on. And then second, that women are, only victims. They're not. First of all, victimhood itself, as Jacqueline Rose puts it beautifully, is not a fixed condition. The moment you see victimhood as a fixed condition. I am a victim. This is American style politics. This is American style feminism. This is Judith Butler all over. I am a victim. I have been victimized. Jacqueline Rose says, the moment you have that notion of victimhood as fixed, you're finished as a person. You have to see victimhood as a transitive state, something you're coming out of, something you're questioning. So HD is not just a simple victim of patriarchy. No way. No way. Nor is she simply saying, that's a man's voice, here is my woman's voice, woman's agency Zindabad. She's not a Sarkari feminist of the Kamla Bhasin variety. No, 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 no. She is saying something quite else. She is saying, listen you man, I am talking to you. Listen to what I have to say. You have much to learn from me as I have to learn from you. That's not reconciliation. That's not transcending of dualism into wholeness. It's not. That's Eliot. Eliot wants some wholeness and what wholeness does he choose? Conservatism, fascism, Catholicism and royalism. Hello? Are you serious? I'd rather be dead than choose T.S. Eliot. He even looks like a timorous fascist himself, which he was.
I have
yeah.
statements you made. One was she herself was the writing, and the other is domestic enslavement of men produces the fascist. You want to expand a little on that?
Book, you have a lovely essay, I love it, on being ill. It's fantastic. It's psychically so, Woolf was just a riot. I mean, a genius of a writer. So she just gets at the heart of what we do when we are ill. Something as simple as that, and weaves the political story out of it. But I wish you had that section from 3 Guineas instead. Whoever makes these syllabi should just die, really. Anyway, so 3 Guineas, she says, what is the whole point of 3 Guineas? She is an anti-fascist person. She's anti-war. Hitler is rising in Europe, right? So she writes this essay called 3 Guineas, and she's really, I don't want to spoil the essay for you. You have to read it. But this particular point that she's making about domestic tyranny is what she's saying is the connection between the home and the nation, which we don't usually make, right? We are saying this is the domestic private sphere, and this is where we inhere, the middle class especially, we hold on to it zealously and tenaciously because of the fascism of the nation. We can't no longer participate in a dharna, we might be arrested. We can't open our mouths on Twitter, we might be arrested. So we hold on to the personal in this terrific way. Woolf says the fascism starts there, with your father, with your husband, with your brother. Vrinda Grover makes this point. There is no law in Indian law, for those of you going to study law after this degree, that is actually about a woman's own agency, except the sexual harassment law. Every law around women, check it up, every law around women in this country is around fathers, brothers, husbands, sons. The only law for women is the act on sexual harassment, which actually resides in the woman. The woman is saying, I am harassed, I feel harassed, I am complaining. And that's why it's the law that the men hate the most. What's the second law that they hate the most? The DV, the Domestic Violence Rewriting in 2000, which said, what was the big threat that men give women, right? Gave women and still give women. I'll beat you up, but I'll also throw you out if you complain. And the woman cannot be thrown out in the middle of the night. Now, the Domestic Violence Act since 2000 says, you have the right to complain, but you have the right to residence. This has upset men more than any other law. Land, control, house. So, what Woolf is saying is, recognize the connection between the tyranny at home and the tyranny of the nation. She had a deeply oppressive father. She knows the tyranny of the house very well. Leslie Stephen was a nasty piece of work and the most eminent Victorian you could ever find. He homeschooled her. Imagine that horror. She couldn't even get out to go to school away from this man. Think of that. As for the second point, writing. See, that is the whole of HD's point, is my point. That HD's entire career, that's why I don't want to reduce it to the biographical. I mean, it's a dramatic enough life. Which bisexual even today leads this kind of life? I mean, all the bisexual men in India marry women and then have sex on Grindr with men. Hello? 85% of the men on Grindr and Planet Romeo are married men. These are bisexuals? I mean, give me a break. I want to read some HD to them every time they contact me. These are the flowers of myself, I tell them. And they say, hey, kya bol raha hai be? Okay? So my point is, that's bisexuals in India. Bisexual women, Meera. I mean, Meera was my only hope. She got married. Very disappointing. So, my point is, being bisexual is not easy. And HD was bisexual all her life. HD took this stand and just stood by it. And she loved men and women through her life. It wasn't just Pound, and it wasn't just Oldington, and it wasn't just Johanna Gregg, and it wasn't just Breyer. Every new man she met, she found him fascinating and a life partner. Every new woman she met, she found her fascinating and a life partner. Breyer put it beautifully, her lover of 40 years. She said, HD had a gift for friendship. I love that line. It's a gift for friendship. I mean, she has a book called The Gift. I mean, so my point, the anthropology of the gift is what she read anthropology widely, like all these men. So what I'm saying is that you read Pound and Eliot, these are all smart men. No one is saying they're not smart. And they're all reading the same books at the same time, right? Anthropology, all the new stuff on psychoanalysis. They're reading it all. But look at what HD is doing with it, and look at what these men are doing with it. Which is why HD not being in this book is criminal. Not being in this syllabus is criminal. Those are my answers.
We have a question at the back.
Sorry? No, I asked him and I said, why don't we have all the women poets, and not only the women poets, I mean, this is modernism. Where are the blacks? There was a Harlem Renaissance down the road in America. Where are the blacks? Where are the gays and lesbians in this book? Where is everybody? And he said, listen, I run a publishing house. I mean, I have to sell a textbook. So I said, theek hai yaar.
There's a
Chalo.
question at the back.
Yeah.
Do you mind introducing yourself? I mean,
No, you don't have to introduce yourself, yeah. Just tell us.
You mentioned the point about HD and the occult and romantic. Can you elaborate more on that? And is there a definite kind of myth making that is happening?
Absolutely, you're completely correct. So there's a myth making absolutely going on in HD, but at several levels. So A, she's engaging with Greek myth. B, she's engaging with psychoanalytic myth. Third, with Hermeticism. Now, Hermeticism is not very easy for me to describe as a movement. I mean, you'll have to look it up. It's many different strands, and HD also combines. She's a very unorthodox. She never belonged to any Hermeticist organization or any cult, but it's also a cult, right? So it involves everything ranging from tarot cards to I don't know. I mean, kind of weird seances in which Ouija boards are used, and you're talking to spirits, and I don't know, all kinds of jazz. But Hermeticism largely, I mean, if someone can give us a better definition of Hermeticism than me, but it's basically a philosophy or a kind of understanding of the world that's drawing on religious stories, mythological stories, questions of the sacred, questions of what we could consider goddesses of, say, like, you know, like Demeter, who's considered the goddess of agriculture, right? I mean, so there's also fertility ritual. So they were reading all this anthropological stuff that was being researched. Anthropology was just emerging as a discipline. But what was HD taking out of it was what's interesting. Eliot was taking out of it pyrotechnics, which I don't like. HD was taking out of it the story of the world in some sense, or also a narrative of anti-violence, a narrative of harmonic natural symbiosis of some kind. And I don't know, you know, it can seem like gobbledygook to a lot of people. A lot of it I don't relate to, because I'm not interested in Hermeticist myth, or I'm not interested in agricultural rituals that are linked to goddesses, and it's not my scene. But I'm just trying to understand from her what I can get in terms of what she's doing in the writing. But there's obviously, therefore, it's a layer that I don't feel like, I don't think I can ever write a book on HD unless I really engage with this Hermeticist stuff, which I don't really know. Is anyone here more inclined to this Hermeticist stuff? They can maybe answer. I'm not good at it, so you'll have to look it up.